Okay, hey ho, let's go. Welcome back to the late night double feature picture show. Uh, that's Pete. That's Pete. I'm so today, Pete and I will be doing something a little different. We've chosen John Carpenter. We're going to go through his filmography, and we're going to list from our least favorite to our most favorite of his films. Just a note that we are only doing his feature films, so Elvis and other made-for-TV stuff is included in this list, mostly because Pete and I haven't seen that stuff for quite a few years, so it wouldn't be fair. So these are just his feature films. So what we'll do here is, I believe we have, 19 of them, Pete?
Yep.
I will have Pete tell me his 19th, which is his least favorite Carpenter. Then I'll do mine, and then I'll do my 18th. So we're going to flip flop back. So, having said all of that, Pete, what is your least favorite John Carpenter?
So it pains me to say this because when I first saw this movie, when it first came out, I really wanted to like it. And for years after that, I still maintained that it wasn't as bad as it actually winds up being. It's Ghosts of Mars. It's it just doesn't really work on any level. It's not well written. It's not well cast. There's minimal special effects, and those special effects that there are not all that impressive. The acting isn't particularly good. John Carpenter's always said that he's always been a fan of westerns. I just wish in this case he had actually just made a western instead of trying to make a science fiction film that wants desperately to be a western. So Ghost of Mars is my 19th.
Yeah, we're in complete agreement on this. I'll go a little further, and I'll just say I hate this movie. I hate everything about this movie. I hate the film. I hate the actors. I hate the writing. I hate the special effects. I even hate the music. And every few years, I think to myself, it's a John Carpenter movie, and I love John Carpenter. This movie can't be as bad as I think it is, and I'll give it another shot. And I hate it all over. So hate, hate. Okay, so my 18th, number 18, for me is Village of the Damned. Now, I'll say this right up front. While I hate Ghost of Mars, I do not hate any of the rest of the movies on this list. Um, these are just degrees of like and maybe slight dislike. Village of the Damned was a real disappointment for me because based on a really good novel, uh, obviously a film in the 60s that is very good, and it was John Carpenter. And I thought, wow, this is going to be great. And it just doesn't work for me at a bunch of levels. I don't think the casting is great for this movie. Um, the writing isn't particularly sharp. Just at a bunch of levels, the film isn't. Again, I don't hate it. I don't think it's awful. It's just not a great
Yeah, at
movie.
number 18, I also have Village of the Damned, and I agree with most of what you said. It's not a good film, but it's not an awful film either. It's just kind of there. Christopher Reeve and Kirstie Alley, I think, are not awful choices to star in this movie, but not as great a casting choices as there could have been. I don't even think it lives up to the original film. I agree with you. It's just a disappointment for a John Carpenter effort.
So, Pete, why don't you give us your 17th?
17th, I'm going to go with John Carpenter's latest theatrical offering, which is The Ward. Um, Again, not a terrible film, but not a great film. Works on a couple different levels. There's a nice buildup of tension in the film, but um, again, not a great effort from one of the screen legends.
Uh, so for my number 17 is Escape from LA. So part of this is the fact that it obviously is a sequel to Escape from New York, um, which you'll see is much higher up on my list of favorite Carpenter films. And so I think it suffers a little from that, right, comparison to what I consider one of John Carpenter's best movies. So there's that. And there's also in Escape from LA, there's a bit more of like the winking at the camera, um, a bit comic book, and that in and of itself isn't bad, but I think it's just too much. As a matter of fact, every time I see the surfing sequence in that movie, I just want to like gouge my eyes out. It's just silly. Um, but anyway, it's my 17th. I will go with switching. I'll go with my number 16. So, which was Pete's number 17, The Ward. John Carpenter had been away from filmmaking for a little while when he came to us with The Ward, and I was kind of excited about it. He was coming back. And by no means is this a bad movie. It's actually a pretty good movie. But that's the issue, right? John Carpenter, in my mind, has made so many really tremendous genre films. Um, and when this, after having been away for quite some time, when he gave us this effort, I was disappointed, just in the fact that not because it was a bad film, but just because it was an okay. So, Pete, you're number 16.
Number 16 for me is Escape from LA. Yeah,
Pretty close.
yeah, Escape from New York is one of my favorite John Carpenter films, and it was almost as if somebody said, "Hey, we need to give people a sequel to this. Let's give them something," and this is what they came up with. It's not awful, but I mean, there's a couple of good casting choices. I think Steve Buscemi as the tour guide, Bruce Campbell as the surgeon of LA, which is a great part. Pam Grier as a Carjack. Um, Really good casting choices. But yeah, there is a little bit of silliness in it. The surfing scene, the basketball scene. Um, and again, it's almost like they said, well, we got to give them something. Let's give them something, and this is what they came up with. So I have Escape from New York at number 16. Escape from LA at number 16.
Yeah, yeah. Pam Grier, a little bit of eye candy never hurts. Um, so, Pete, give us your. Why don't you just go ahead and give us your 15?
So at number 15, I'm going to go with John Carpenter's Body Bags. It's an anthology film that was out a while back where John Carpenter himself plays the Undertaker, the more caretaker. It's not a terrible. The four stories that comprise the movie are just okay. It's John Carpenter's role as the Undertaker that is really the best part of the film. So I have that at number 15.
Yeah, and just so you know, I mean, Pete and I have been fairly close, really, so far. Either our choices were exactly the same or off by one. And just here, there was no collusion here, right? This is just honestly Pete off on his own, making his assessment and me making my assessment. I'm not really surprised that we're so close in terms of how we're selecting these because people have very similar tastes, not just in movies, but in a lot of things. So my number 15 is Memoirs of an Invisible Man. And in truth, I have not seen this movie in quite some time, so I should watch it again. Uh, I think part of the issue for me is that the subject matter wasn't treated completely straightforwardly as a like horror or science fiction. There's a bit of a bent to it. Maybe not as much as I'm remembering because Chevy Chase is in the movie, so maybe that's just my brain saying comedy, Chevy Chase. Again, not a movie that's bad in any way, shape, or form. I remember enjoying it when I saw it in movie theaters and then in subsequent viewings, although it's been a number of years. So, a good film, just not one of my all-time favorites. Peter, you're on 15 or 14?
We're moving to 14.
Okay, give me your 14.
So at 14, I have Vampires. Um, and this is a movie that's evolved for me, and not in a good way. When I first saw it in the movies, when it first came out, I really loved it. It's based on a John Stakely novel. And I remember when I read that book after the movie was made, I read the book and I thought to myself, yeah, I don't know who would have thought that would have made a good movie, but obviously somebody did, and they gave John Carpenter some money, and this is what he came up with. Not a terrible movie, but I want it to be better. Could be better. And part of the issue I have with it is James Woods in the starring role, who just completely overacts the part. Not that would be the first time James Woods overacted a part, but the rest of the casting isn't good. Thomas Ian Griffith as the Lord Vampire is just kind of a he's kind of a just kind of there. He doesn't lend anything to the part. Um, and Daniel Baldwin as James Woods is number one sidekick. Again, not an especially intriguing casting choice. Some decent special effects. The way they kill the vampires, there's a couple of bloody, gory scenes when the vampire raids the vampire hunter's hotel room and slaughters a bunch of them. Pretty good. But I think James Woods' performance is what really ruins this movie for me.
Okay, number 14 for me is Body Bags. Again, I think I agree with everything Pete said. An anthology film. My favorite parts were definitely John Carpenter as the Undertaker. Kind of a takeoff of Crypt Keeper. He's in makeup, and John Carpenter's really kind of camping it up in between those shorts, but really like camping it up like in a really enjoyable way. The stories themselves are fine. Nothing to me like I think of Creep Show. How each story in Creep Show is just fantastic. These are good stories. So not at all a bad movie, but sitting at number 14. I'll jump in and do my number 13. Number 13 for me is John Carpenter's first feature film, Dark Star. I believe this was initially his college film. Connected with Dan O'Bannon, who made the film with him, who both, I think, co-wrote and has a starring role. Obviously, as a first feature, the special effects aren't great. Characters aren't fully fleshed out. Some silliness going on, which, it's supposed to be. It's a comedic element to it. Clearly, my favorite sequences are the beach ball monster when he makes an appearance in the film. And also, one scene of that film, which no matter how many times I see it, I still guffaw as if it's the first time I ever saw it, which is the scene where the astronaut is just bodily ejected from the ship. There's like a sound effect, and you just see him like ejected into space. And just every time I see it, it makes me laugh. So at number 13 for me is Dark Star.
Okay, number 13, I have In the Mouth of Madness. This is a film that's kind of wants to be an H.P. Lovecraft type of story.
Yeah.
Loosely associated with the Cthulhu mythos. Sam Neill does a good job as Sutter Kane, a writer who finds himself in this, kind of going back and forth between this alternate reality where there's things that may or may not be real. I like it, but it doesn't. I don't like it enough to move it up higher on the list.
Yeah, I would say one of the things about that film, Pete and I have discussed this in the past, is that you see some of the books that Sutter Kane was supposed to have written, which had some great titles, but the thing that really grabs me about it is the cover art on those books. And every time I see it, I think to myself, I wish those books really existed because I want to read them. So number 12 for me is vampires. So Pete and I have completely flip flopped, right? So Pete really liked this movie when he first saw it, and I really hated it. Not as much as not like Ghosts of Mars hate, but I was not a fan of this film in any way, shape, or form. And this went on for years and years. I would watch it and watch it and watch it, and I always just disliked large elements of it. So whereas Pete over time has gone from really liking it to not being such a big fan, I've kind of reversed and I really didn't like it that much, and now I like it a lot more. I agree with most of Pete's assessments in terms of James Woods and his acting and the rest of the cast, and but I don't know, something about it. It's kind of like again a Western vampire mashup, and it's just grown on me over the years. So yeah, so vampires at number 12 for me. At number 11 for me, I have Assault on Precinct 13. Again, Carpenter showing his proclivity to want to make westerns. Now, clearly, Assault on Precinct 13 isn't a western. It's set in contemporary Los Angeles at the time the film was made, but it has that Rio Bravo kind of siege mentality. Right? The good guys are in a building and the bad guys are outside. So Carpenter once again showing his proclivity to want to remake westerns in its own Just the film has issues, right? There's some silliness going film at times. Um, the acting is okay. Uh, um, Although there is a devastating scene in the movie of the killing of a little girl at the beginning of the film. And even all these years later, when that scene comes up, I dread it because it's just something about the way it's filmed that's just very effective. So I love this movie a lot more when it first came out. As I got older, my taste got a little more sophisticated. It's dropped a little bit, but still a very good John Carpenter. That is my number 11. What's your 11?
Number 11 for me is Christine. I got Christine number 11. It's a movie that I really, really like, but it's based on a Stephen King novel, so it's not an original piece of work in any way. John Carpenter stays fairly close to the novel. It changes the ending somewhat to make it more palatable for horror film fans. But I think it's well cast. Arnie, Keith Gordon as Arnie Cunningham, Alexandra Paul do a nice job in the two lead roles, and it stays fairly close to the novel. It's got some good special effects, how the car kind of reconstitutes itself whenever it's damaged. And the story of a haunted car can be somewhat a little bit campy and a little bit silly, but I think John Carpenter does a nice job of building tension and suspense in the film, and I really like it. I like it. I like it. Maybe in some ways it deserves to be higher on my list, but I got it in there, number 11.
So why don't you give us your number 10, Pete?
And number 10, I have Dark Star. As you said, Alice, John Carpenter's first feature film when he was a film student at Berkeley, I think it was. Um, and really, the only reason I have it this high on the list is because without it, if somebody hadn't taken a liking to it and recognized John Carpenter as a director who had, great promise, he might not have become anything. So somebody had to take a chance on it, and that's really the reason I have it this high on the list.
Okay, so number 10 for me is In the Mouth of Madness. Pete said this is a film that flirts with H.P. Lovecraft themes, um, some interesting visual effects, really good performances. I said Sutter Kane in the film as an author, and I really wish that his books existed. The kind of books I really want to read. So a solid effort from John Carpenter. I thought there were elements that maybe could have been added to the film that could have boosted it a little bit, but overall a good effort from John Carpenter. That's it. Number 10 for me. Excuse me. My number 9 is Starman. Uh, and 9 seems like it's a little, but I love this movie. I love everything about it. The performances are just amazing. How Jeff Bridges. I don't think he was even nominated for an award for this film. Was he, Pete? Jeff Bridges, plays an alien who utilizes the DNA of Karen Allen's dead husband to replicate Karen Allen's dead husband. Clearly not really her dead husband; it's the alien in form. And his performance, somehow you never doubt for a moment that this is an alien inhabiting a human body. And they don't do it with special effects. He looks like Jeff Bridges throughout the entire film, but somehow he makes his performance feel like he is uncomfortable in that skin. And it's a science fiction film, obviously, but it's a love story also, a little bit of a tragic love story. So, Starman at number 9. That sounds low. It's a great film. I love it. It's just a John Carpenter, some of the great films. So anyway, that was my number. Pete, what's your number?
At 9, I also have Starman, and again, it could be higher up on a list if there weren't so many other great films that John Carpenter's made. It could be higher on a list, but I agree with you. Jeff Bridges gives an Oscar caliber performance in the film. Criminally underrated actor I think is Jeff Bridges overall, and this performance goes right along with it. It's a tremendous performance. It's really well cast. Karen Allen as the grieving widow who has to deal with the fact that this being who is clearly not her husband, but it looks exactly like her husband, Charles Martin Smith, who plays the SETI investigator, who is the only one who believes that the aliens should be captured and reasoned with and treated kindly rather than dissected for experimental purposes. So it's a really great film, and like you said, the special effects are there, but they don't dominate the film. They just do enough to remind you that you're watching a science fiction film instead of a love story.
Yeah, and there's so much more I'd love to say about this film. So, but rather than do it here, maybe Pete, you and I can do a separate video on Starman, because there's just so much I'd like to say and things to quote. But we'll save that for another time. Pete, what's your number eight?
At eight, I have Assault on Precinct 13. Again, John Carpenter's homage to westerns, um, um, gang members in Los Angeles who lay siege on a police station where there are police and also a convict that they're transporting to another precinct. They're under siege from gang members, and it's basically basically they're holed up in there trying to defend themselves until daylight and until some backup can arrive. Um, Starring one of the actors that has a cult following in science fiction movies, Austin Stoker, who passed away earlier this year. But a really good film, really a serious film. No campiness, no humor at all in the film. It's a very serious movie, and I have that at number eight.
Number eight for me is Christine. Um, so, as Pete indicated, an adaptation of a Stephen King novel that I love very much. When when it first published, I was like a little disappointed when I found out it was about really Stephen Haunted Car. Um, but it's such a great novel, and I think John Carpenter did a great job adapting it. Some really great imagery in the film. The way the car is filmed, you really do get a sense of menace from that car when it's on screen. And as Pete pointed out earlier, really good casting, good acting, good writing. So I have Christine at number eight. At number seven for me, I have They Live. And again, this may seem a little low, and there are people out there just adore They Live, and I do too. Uh, uh, the casting is superb. The concept is superb. And the whole idea behind the film of aliens kind of putting us to sleep, and basically, even though we're not literally sleeping, they kind of like um, uh, kind of mesmerize us into conforming, acting in certain ways. And the two lead characters discover sunglasses or glasses that allow us to see the true nature of the aliens, the true nature of messages that are out there, and how they kind of control us. Even though this film was made in the '80s, very relevant to today, where we are today in the world. And I might add, one of the all-time great fist fights in a movie. So at number eight for me, I'm sorry, number seven for me is They.
And I also have They Live at number seven. We're getting up into the top echelon of Carpenter films here, so we're probably going to agree on a lot of these. But yeah, I love the film. It's well cast with Roddy Piper, God rest in peace. Keith David as the two lead characters who have kind of they kind of need each other in the film, but they kind of don't like each other. They don't. Roddy Piper discovers the plot by the aliens to take over mankind by lulling us into this sense of of, 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 of sleepiness and just conforming and going along with things. The subliminal messages are on billboards, they're on the news, etc. And Keith David doesn't want to hear any of it. He doesn't believe it, which leads to that fight, back alley fight that you mentioned, which is a centerpiece of the film. Great ending too. I love the way the film ends. And again, if it weren't for the John Carpenter's body of work, this film might be higher on the list, but I have it there at number seven.
Why don't you give us your number six?
At number six, I have Big Trouble in Little China. Again, the classic John Carpenter film. It's kind of combines horror, fantasy, action all into one film. It stars Kurt Russell. It's got a lot of funny lines in it. Um, the Chinese gangs and ninjas and all kinds of weird stuff going on, monsters. Very funny, good action sci-fi film.
Yeah, we could do an entire video on this film also, and maybe we will one day. I think probably at some point we'll probably do at least a review of each of these films individually, maybe the top 10 of them one at a time, because there's just so much to say about these films. But yes, a great movie. For me, at number six is The Fog. Again, really good cast. Obviously at its heart, it's a ghost story. Um, and the performances are good, the writing is good. The idea of you don't get a lot of horror films whose center around ghost pirates. It's a little bit of an in terms of horror films, but really well done, really well handled by John Carpenter. My understanding was that a lot of the violence that we do see, and there's not a ton of violence, it's not a very bloody. A lot of the violence that we do see in the film of the pirates and using gaffing hooks and swords and were done after the film was actually showed to an audience. The audience, it was really done more as a straight ghost story without a lot of the violence that we see in the final cut. And the audience was not pleased, so they kind of went back and they did it. And of course, those effects provided by the great Rob Bottin, and he actually plays the lead pirate at the end, who appears in the church. So at number six for me, The Fog. What's your next one, Keith?
Number five, I have Prince of Darkness. Again, I watched it recently. It's a great movie. Again, it's just kind of got religious themes of the devil trying to force his way into this world. A bunch of college students discover the vessel that he's supposedly or allegedly, occupying, and don't realize until they're there to investigate the paranormal implications of it, and they don't realize until later on that they have to actually stop him from entering this world. Otherwise, the implications are horrifying to think of. And again, a great ending, well cast, well acted, understated movie. Donald Pleasance makes an appearance. He has a kind of supporting role in the film. But I have that at number five.
Yeah, so number five for me is Escape from New York. One of the great characters to appear in a John Carpenter film, Snake Plissken. Um, just what can you say about the movie? Sci-fi elements to it. There's action elements to it. An amazing cast. Uh, um, any movie that has Lee Van Cleef as a part of their cast is aces by me. I love Lee Van Cleef, Ernest Borgnine, Adrienne Barbeau, um, Harry Dean Stanton, just endless. Uh, just a great film, and played mostly straight. Yeah, there's little comic touches. One of my favorite scenes is like, yeah, we don't want to take Broadway. What's wrong with Broadway? And then all of a sudden you see like Broadway, where the parking meters used to be, is lined with decapitated heads of people. So really great film, great soundtrack, great score, great acting, and of course one of the all-time iconic characters, Snake Plissken, who of course we all think is dead. So at number five for me is Escape. Pete.
I already did number five. You're up with number four.
So number four for me is Big Trouble in Little China. This is a great movie. It's a mishmash of like a whole bunch of different films. It's a little bit of a kung fu movie. It's a little bit of a sci-fi movie. It's a little bit of a supernatural movie. There are very funny things that happen in the film, but it doesn't detract from the seriousness of what's going on in the movie. Again, another film that I could spend an hour talking with Pete about. So maybe we'll do that in the future. But at number four for me, Big Trouble in Little China.
At number four, I have Escape from New York. Just watched it recently. Really holds up well. And you got to remember these films were movies that had made use of technology, but before there was such technology. So it really works for me that they can actually make a film about flying into New York City, which has become a maximum security prison, to rescue the president whose escape pod is ejected and landed there without the use of such technology as exists today. But it really works for me on every level. Kurt Russell as Snake Plissken. Of course, it's got cameos by John Carpenter stalwarts Charles Cyphers and Tom Atkins, Harry Dean Stanton, Adrian Barbeau, Isaac Hayes as the Duke of New York. So it works for me on every level. It's a good action film with sci-fi elements.
Yeah, I forgot to mention too, there is a cameo appearance by Kurt Russell's first wife, Susan Hubley.
Susan Hubley, yeah.
Yeah, she appears in the chock full of nuts at the beginning of the film when he's first gone into Manhattan.
That's the first time we hear the line "Snake Plissken." I heard you were
Heard
dead.
you were dead, right? She's kind of like pulled under the floorboards by the other dwellers. Okay, so that was your number what, Pete?
That was 4.
Give us your number 3.
So at number 3, I have The Fog. One of my favorite horror movies of all time. It's a ghost story, as you mentioned, but it's a serious ghost story. There's no, as you mentioned earlier with Escape from LA, there's no winking at the camera. It's a very straightforward, played very straight, serious ghost story. Special effects are good. They're not, again, they don't dominate the film as they don't really dominate in almost all of John Carpenter's films. But when they're there, they're effective. Adrian Barbeau really has one of the lead parts, along with Tom Atkins and Jamie Lee Curtis, are well cast. Serious ghost story with Hal Holbrook plays the role of the priest very very well. Carpenter by John cameo by John Carpenter during the film, but for me it works on every level. It's just a great movie, and I watch it every Halloween.
Yeah, the thing I would say too is I particularly like Adrian Barbeau's performance in this because for large swaths of that movie, she is acting alone. She runs a radio station, which is a lighthouse, and most of her scenes are in that lighthouse. So she's kind of like interacting with the townspeople through the radio, and not an easy performance, but really well done. That was your number 3, Pete.
Yeah, that was 3.
So number 3 for me is Halloween. There was a time I think where Halloween was probably one for me. Still a all-time classic John Carpenter movie. Obviously, the introduction to Michael Myers, iconic horror figure. Just what can you say about the movie? It started, in my mind, the slasher craze of the late '70s through the '80s, and of all of them, probably still the best of them. Even though, again, a fairly bloodless movie. There's not a ton. There's violence, but you don't see a ton of blood in the film. Of course, who could ever forget the soundtrack? To this day, you hear that music, and the only thing you can think of is Halloween and Michael Myers. So the number 3 for me is Halloween. Pete, what's your next?
Number 2, I have Halloween. Yeah, and as you mentioned, it defines an entire genre. If you ask people today, what's the most popular slasher film of all time, I think most people would answer Halloween. But as you mentioned, it's not a gory film. It's not like Friday the 13th where you see heads chopped off and slashed throats and things like that. It's most of the violence is implied. It's Jamie Lee Curtis's first role, and she went on to become one of the great screen queens of all time before she went on to bigger and better things. Originally it was entitled The Babysitter Murders, which I think would have doomed it to failure. But I think since it was titled Halloween, at least at that time of year, and again made on a shoestring budget, but this time adjusted for inflation, it's still one of the biggest grossing horror films ever. My second favorite Carpenter film.
Yeah, my understanding is that the credit for Halloween season and the title goes to the producer Mustafa Akkad. I think he read the script, liked the ideas, and suggested to John Carpenter that he set it around Halloween. They call it Halloween, so props to Mustafa. So at number 2 for me is The Prince of Darkness. As Pete indicated, I think this is a highly underrated John Carpenter film. The themes. We're talking about devil, we're talking about religion, we're talking about physics. A movie that marries quantum mechanics with religion. The whole concept of the idea that they took this thing that encased Satan and thought to themselves, like, how do you represent that on film? And what they came up with is kind of brilliant. It's like this swirling green black miasma, and it works, right? When you're looking at it, you're like, yeah, that would be, if you're going to trap the devil, that's kind of what it could potentially look like. Really good performances. Alice Cooper in a smallish role. Just really an enjoyable film. One of my favorite all-time Carpenters, and I think underrated for his filmography. Okay, so we are down to our Pete and I's pick for the number one all-time John Carpenter film, according to us. Paying attention is probably pretty obvious as to what that film must be. But Pete, go ahead and reveal your favorite all-time Carpenter film.
Favorite all-time Carpenter film, also one of my top three all-time favorite science fiction films, John Carpenter's The Thing, based on John W. Campbell's short story "Who Goes There," which incidentally, in case you didn't know this, unpublished material to that story was also found recently, and it's in the works to become its own new novella. So keep an eye out for that wherever you buy your
Oh,
books.
even I didn't know.
Yeah, and follows the John W. Campbell story much closer than the Howard Hawks version of The Thing, which was made back in the 50s. The only one of John Carpenter's movies that is special effects driven, I would say. A great cast. Don't let me undersell the cast. Kurt Russell, Wilford Brimley, Donald Moffat. I mean, Tom Waits, Keith David. The list goes on. Of just tremendously cast and works on every single level. When it came out, it was considered a box office bomb. It was up against some big time summer blockbusters that year, E.T., Poltergeist. Didn't do well at the box office, didn't do well with the critics, but over time it's become a cult classic, and it works on every single level. There's not a weak part in the movie. It focuses on a group of scientists at the North Pole, who are under siege by an alien life form that they can't see, can't identify, and it takes over human hosts. And so the undertone of paranoia among these guys, who's a thing, who's not, who can I trust, who can't I trust, it builds over time. And it's just a tremendous effort on every level from John Carpenter and the cast and the filmmakers.
Yeah, so obviously Pete and I are in agreement on this. To Pete's point about the competition the thing was up against in the summer that it was released. Pete and I saw this in the theaters when it was released, and there was no doubt in my mind that we had seen a great movie. So I loved it from the first, and then obviously the advent of videotape becoming more popular than DVD, and the film grew in popularity. Now it's where it was kind of like reviled by the critics and shunned by the public. Even the critics have come around. Much like Night of the Living Dead, there's a bunch of critics who didn't really love Dead, and then second viewing, um, changed their opinion. Same thing with thing. A lot of critics now hail it as a really great film. To Pete's point, great cast, ensemble cast. That many actors in a movie, and what John Carpenter does is, he with that many actors in the film, with that much stuff going on, you never kind of feel lost as to who's who and who's doing what and what's going on. Yeah, there's obviously that sense of paranoia through the film. Obviously the thing can mimic any one of them, and does. So at any time, until later in the film, where they figure out a way to potentially identify who's really human, who's a thing. Prior to that, any one of them could be a thing. Multiple of them could be a thing, and they don't know. And that plays very well. Special effects by Rob Bottin, practical effects are just tremendous. And I think he was like 20 or 21 or 22 years old, and kind of making this stuff up on the fly. So score by the great Ennio Morricone, who's actually recently passed away. So yeah, the thing to me, as great as John Carpenter's filmography is, this is the crown jewel in his movie. Now, Pete and I have discussed this in recent months. A lot of talk about John Carpenter talking about making a sequel that he would direct. And as Pete and I say when we talk to each other, there's so much money thrown at sequels and prequels, and in the world. Here's a film that has become a genuine, loved film. Like, why isn't some studio throwing like $50 million at John Carpenter and saying, "Go do"? So I hope it happens soon, and that we get we have a prequel. So let's get a sequel. Love to find out what happened to Charles 3D. So that's it. That is our list. 19 from our least favorite to our most favorite John Carpenter films. Pete and I have discussed doing this for some other directors. We talked about Dario Argento. Thinking about like David Cronenberg would be a good candidate. Pete, you mentioned somebody a little outside of genre. Who were you talking about?
I thought maybe one of my favorite directors of all time, not necessarily a horror director, but is Ridley Scott. But the more I think about it, the more it might take 3 or 4 sessions to do that with his body of work.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, Pete and I have ideas about doing more of this stuff for specific directors. So hopefully people will see this and enjoy it and engage with it, motivate us to go out and do some more. So, Pete, we're wrapping up on the John Carpenter filmography, a lot of years of filmmaking by him, a lot of years of film viewing by you and I. Any just final thoughts on John Carpenter and his films?
One last thought on the thing is there are a lot of different versions of that available on disc, DVD, and Blu-ray that you can get. And if you don't have it and you're planning on going out and getting one of them, look for the one with the commentary track that has the commentary track by John Carpenter and Kurt Russell, because it's almost as entertaining as the film itself. They talk freely about the challenges of making the film and the fun they had making it, and it's almost as entertaining as watching the movie itself. So if you're going to get one, make sure it has that commentary track on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, you can tell. Number one, you can tell that Kurt Russell and John Carpenter genuinely like each other. There's a friendship there beyond the professional relationship, and the amount of laughing they do on the commentary is really impressive. You can tell that they're really enjoying their remembrances of making. So I would agree with that 100%. So if you do come across this and you enjoyed this kind of video from Pete and I, and you have an idea about another director you would like to see us do this for, leave a comment, and clearly we'll consider it. So if you come across this video and you enjoy it, please give it a like, give the channel a subscribe, as we're trying to grow the channel. And so thank you once again for joining us at the Late Night Double Feature Picture Show. And until next time, be good.
See ya.